These past few weeks have been super packed. I took a detour to work on building out the web server and database. I didn't intend on doing this at this moment, but I was heavily inspired by the impending Apple developer subscription renewal. Essentially, in order to host anything, in addition to giving them a 30% cut, you have to pay them $100 per year to actually use the platform. And since I still had to figure out the major question of how I want to monetize this culinary game, I thought this would be a great opportunity to answer both of those questions at the same time. There are several different approaches I could take with it. Because it's a multiplayer game and has ongoing costs, there are some games that utilize a membership, a cash drop with in-game transactions, and sometimes they also combine that with charging an upfront fee. The more I thought about this problem, the more I think that the question comes down to, do you need to coerce users to pay for something, or will they just pay for things that they enjoy? And I think in the way that a lot of things are set up, there's always a temptation to try to make as much money as possible. And although I've never released a multiplayer game before, I've tentatively come to the conclusion that I want to let people support it if they want to. Throughout this video, I'll explain a bit more about what I mean, and I'll also talk about some game development updates as well. So one of the first concerns I had was hosting a game is not free, so doesn't that mean that you have to charge? And, furthermore, making something isn't free. Unfortunately, in this life, we have to pay to live. So whatever we create costs however much it costs to live and more. I did a lot of research on what it takes to host a game myself, and in the same way that marketplaces like Amazon, Apple, and Google take huge cuts out of sellers' margin to the point where it doesn't even make financial sense. You'll also find that there are a lot of big tech companies that capitalize on service and web hosting. For web hosting, to some extent, is not as bad because web hosting companies aren't also saying, okay, any transaction you make on your site, you have to give me 30%. Of course, there are still payment processing services that will take a cut, but nowhere near as high as 10% even. So for online games, it requires at least one server, a website, and a database. And each one of these items can range from being free to tens of dollars per month to hundreds or thousands when you get to larger company sizes and then you start introducing things like logging and so on too. These hosting costs are honestly quite small compared to living costs, but a negative is a negative, right? But I think looking at these prices confirmed to me that, at least for this smaller indie game use case, which is pretty unlikely to have millions of users to justify having huge hosting costs, made me realize that the concern of web hosting does matter in the sense that I shouldn't have too high of costs, but it probably shouldn't factor heavily into how I monetize the game because it costs way more to live. So moving on to the next major concern, which is that finances affect gameplay. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the games I played throughout my life, ranging from when I was a kid and couldn't really afford to spend anything on games, all the way to being an adult and being a bit more financially capable. I think regardless of how much I can afford within a game, perhaps with the exception of single purchase games, games that require you to unlock new features and functionality end up promoting some kind of resentment, whether it is resentment against the company or the developer for kind of tricking you into paying for something, either through promoting artificial scarcity or making things inconvenient in the game so that you'll pay for it, or resentment from not being able to access certain functionality or feeling like, oh, some people are able to do this, but I can't. I think those kind of feelings, if possible, should not be present while playing a game, even though we are in the real world, especially because I want the game to be more collaborative and bring together people in a different way than we currently do in our everyday life. I think it would then be hypocritical to put monetary barriers into playing different parts of the game or having money affect how fast you can play the game. You've also probably come across a lot of discourse or firsthand experience of how predatory game companies and software companies and companies in general can be. Around a month ago now, I watched this video about for profit creative software. I think it was around a 2 hour long video, but it was one of those things that really helped solidify my thoughts around how I want to monetize the game. The creator really helps illustrate the effects that costs have on how people experience software, and I think it also applies to games as well. I'll link to the video if you're interested, but the artist depicts this multi-year journey of hopping from one 3D modeling software to the next. And each software would go from the good old days of single use pricing to hiking up the prices and essentially charging the equivalent of that one time payment every single month. And you don't even own the software. So essentially, you're just sinking money into it. Good old rentier capitalism. Beyond just thinking about greed when it comes to pricing, I also think that pricing affects how people treat each other in the game and also who is allowed to play and how people end up playing it. Since I'm making a multiplayer game that I will at some point add cooperative functionality to, and also because I'm not a mega corporation who needs to continuously increase profits, I think it makes sense to make the game free. So, in short, what I've decided is that I'm not going to ignore the cost of making a game. I do believe in people supporting what they want to keep around and what they get value from. There are a lot of major examples of this, like Wikipedia or, even Godot, Game Engine, Blender, and so on. All of these projects have taken time and sacrifice to build out and to continuously maintain, but there isn't the feeling of being exploited when you're using it, and people do pay to support them. And there's even smaller examples where you have independent news media companies and, so on. I want to see whether I can follow the donation model and just be able to focus on making the game fun to play. This month, I had to decide whether to renew my Apple developer membership, which I probably will for at least another year. And last month, I tried to make my game available on Android, but I wasn't able to. After sinking hours and even several $100s into it, it turns out that they have really high playtest requirements where you either need to have like 15 employees or you set up a system where you're getting free or very cheap labor from people. So I've decided that I also don't want to promote practices that are very similar in money extracting ethos. Those issues spurred me into working on alternative distribution for cocktail stories. And since I also need to create a web server for the culinary multiplayer game that I'm developing, I figured that it was a good time as any to accomplish all of these things at once. So in addition to making a website, I went back and I made a lot of improvements to cocktail stories, especially around improving the game sizing so that it looks better on desktops, not just on mobile. Since I'm using Godot, it was fairly easy to make versions for all the different platforms. I even realized that it's actually very easy to run Windows applications on Mac. So I managed to test out the other versions of cocktail stories on my computer as well. I'm definitely very thankful to have this interoperability. Now, as for the website, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I decided to use a static website, which essentially means it just serves HTML and CSS and whatever JavaScript. But since I want to be able to distribute games and take payments through my own website, I did a complete rehaul of everything. Before I deployed the new version, I took a video of the old version, so I'll insert that soon. And I'll also talk a bit about what the architecture of it looks like in case you're also thinking about getting off of platforms and hosting things yourself. It is definitely doable. And it's always good to not be so dependent on the whims of large tech companies. Before the changes, it was a fairly straightforward site. So you had the home landing page, which has the released game and a bit of a description as well. With this current version, I made quite a few changes, but there's some key style differences, and I have upgraded to show more live shots from the game. So now instead of having a simple list, you have a large image with similar information below, which I think follows a lot more modern web development styling. And then we have the purchase section at the bottom. So now I actually host downloads of the game myself, and I've expanded the platforms to include Windows, Linux, and Android, in addition to Apple and Mac. I did think about making a video for this, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary right now. I might in the future. Since you can now make an account to actually purchase the game, I've gone through the proper route and made the policies. So we have a terms of use now, which is very long. And we have a privacy policy, as well as a cookie policy and a return policy as well, since you can purchase the game. Furthermore, I've also made the support section. I've integrated Stripe completely, so I'm not touching any payment information at all, which I think is a lot more secure. And going to my local version, this is what it looks like when you actually purchase the game. And these links actually work, so you can download it, and then you have access to the actual game that you can play locally. Of course, I spent a lot of time working on the security, so all of this requires being logged in. And it's pretty cool because Stripe offers a lot of functionalities that I can connect to. So you can change your subscription, you can cancel it as well, and you can also get access to all of your past purchases and receipts. So it's really cool not to have to re-implement that myself. And in line with user policy and data ownership, you're able to delete your account as well. Now let's dive into the architecture of what powers the website itself. Okay, here we go. I'll explain everything. So hopefully this is not too overwhelming, but I've drawn out all the different components of the website, and focusing here, we have the website, which is what you can view. This is the Orchid Teddy website. We use Tailwind CSS as our style library. And for scripts, we're just using plain JavaScript. I did initially want to go the fancy route of like, okay, let's see what all of the cool new frameworks are out and let me use them all on my website. But realistically, not everything integrates well together. And it's just probably going to be more complex to maintain over time. So as they say, keep it simple. And Django offers a lot. It has a front end, it has a back end, even has an admin section that lets you view all the different components of your site. If we were just making a static site, this would be all that we needed. And we would probably just use HTML instead of Django's templating HTML. I have this little legend here. This is not a traditional system diagram, but for our site, we have a website that will communicate with the server, which is also hosted in Django, which is very convenient because you have less moving parts to manage and deploy. And then the server is authenticated so that it can communicate with the database. So we don't directly communicate from the website to the database because then you can easily overload the database. You can't use things like caching to put less load on your database in the future if you wanted to. Communicating with a database from the server just adds a lot more access controls and also a layer of abstraction. So you can imagine in the future, I could have a culinary game in here, which then communicates with the server and then doesn't have to worry about the database or how to do payments or anything like that because the server will hold all of that logic. But let's undo that for now because we don't have a game server yet. So this database has things like users, game purchases, and then eventually game data. And speaking of users, the server also communicates with Stripe to manage our payments. To serve these game purchases, I'm using AWS, which is Amazon Web Service. I'd rather not use Amazon, but it did provide the cheapest storage. Essentially, for my storage needs, is completely free. I may revisit this because I don't really want to use Amazon. Whenever the user purchases the game and we want to give them their game download files, we can create temporary download files for that user to access so the links aren't just public and out there for everyone on the internet to use. This does not prevent pirating. It's impossible, really, to prevent pirating, but you do what you can, I guess, and hope that people will support the real thing. Okay. I do allow you to create users. And when you have user data, you have to make sure that you manage it securely and you give people access over that data, including the right to delete their data. So that's where these periodic jobs come into play. This periodic job needs a data store for its results. The periodic job scheduler is started by Django, and this periodic job manages the user data. So let's say that the user has deleted their account and they haven't logged in for 30 days, and we want to delete all of their user data. This is the job that will handle that. And another thing to mention is that Stripe is communicating with our server through our webhook, which is essentially an endpoint that Stripe sends events to, like events that say that a user has canceled their subscription, updated their subscription, their payment failed, things like that. This is the crux of our system right now. And one very important thing I forgot to put here is the email server. So if you have a server, that doesn't mean that you can send your users emails, like confirmation emails for their password and things like that. So you need an email server, unfortunately. These can be expensive. A lot of the free ones have become paid, but I found one, Bravo, which is still a good platform that you can use to configure your app to be able to send emails directly from your server rather than having to log in and send like a newsletter or something. Now let's look at the pricing of these things. To host a website, it costs $7 per month. The database costs $6 per month, and Stripe processing also costs zero. But they do take a percentage out of all of your transactions, but still about $13 per month for the smallest servers possible, smallest databases. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of what it takes to build out and operate your own system. For all of these, I'm using Render. It's very straightforward. It doesn't have as much functionality as Google Cloud or Amazon Web Service, but it's similar in the way you can compare Godot to Unity. It's a lot simpler to use. It may not have so many fancy things that you can do, but the things that you need to do, you can do fairly quickly. So I think I did pretty well with this combination, especially because my static website on Google Cloud prior to this was about $18, $18 to $20 per month just to have a static website with HTTPS. So with this setup, we have a lot more moving necessary parts and it's way cheaper. So that's all for today. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Subscribe if you'd like to continue following these game development updates. Now that we have this website, it'll probably be a good idea for me to build out the game server that will power the culinary game so that we can start having real data and add just another layer of legitimacy.